Matters with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
You know how Canada, Paul, has a reputation as being the friendliest nation on the planet? Well, even Canadians have come down hard on a particular food we're going to be talking about this morning on Health Matters. Good morning, Paul. How are you doing this weekend?
Another shocking reality.
Well, it's a study they came out with that says this particular food is just bad for you in all kinds of ways. In fact, it's bad in ways that you, Paul Rosen, have been talking about for years. How about that? The Canadians are backing you up.
You know, the reason I talk about it so much is because I'm outspent by tens of millions of dollars by the sugar industry and promoting the product and how safe it is, and how there's no real proof that there's that there are any health risks involved in consuming it, and so forth and so on. And so, I'm just one relatively lonely voice on a Sunday morning, in our on our radio station, talking about this so that people really understand that the reality is that sugar really is first and foremost at the root of any person's functional illness.
Okay, and actually, you're not alone or lonely in that, Paul. The survey I was looking at was from the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and they talk about the many ill effects caused by sugar. And also, when you say sugar industry, that's kind of a misnomer, because there is maybe a monolithic sugar industry, but sugar's everywhere. So many foods and so many industries use this stuff that it's just more omnipresent than most of us imagine.
Well, there really is a sugar industry, and there really are supportive quote-unquote foundations which promote the product as would any good capitalistic culture do.
So they can create like a full organization, let's say American Sugar Advocates, and put out all kinds of positive information about sugar, for example.
And
right?
As it turns out, that's exactly what's been happening since certainly the mid-1960s, when the sugar industry itself went about doing something that the tobacco industry became extremely good at, and the sugar industry followed them, and that is basically shifting the responsibility or shifting the focus to other things, trying to take the eye off of them, and that's what the sugar industry did back then. They hired scientists from reputable organizations. They paid them to do science, telling them that what they were looking for. And, oh my gosh, voila, would you imagine that the studies that they did supported or at least diverted the risks that sugar might pose to overall health to something else, and that was fat, which is why most of us were inundated with the information that fat was bad for you, right? That fat was really the risk to your cardiovascular system.
Really, really interesting. That's a concerted effort on the part of the sugar industry just to make sure we're focused on something else.
Absolutely. It was a divert your attention trick. The old magic, watch this, right? And in one hand, something's going on, and in the other hand, that's where you're focused.
Right, a diversion, like you said.
Yeah. And so what's happened is that our beliefs have then been shaped by this misdirection. And so that's why so many people believe that fat is bad for you. It's why so many tens of millions of people eat low fat. It's where the whole low fat, industry came from, was on the back of this, misdirected. I mean, I don't know if it was fraudulent, but it's fraudulent from the standpoint of masquerading as actually good science.
So let's say there's this misdirection. Obviously, there is. I think many of us still know and believe that sugar is bad for us. Why do we choose as consumers to readily ignore that information and to do it so much, to do it as often as we do?
Well, I think primarily it's because, people are spending most people are just trying to keep their head above water. Right? Most people are not looking around for the details, looking below the surface to find out what's really happening. And, I was forced to look below the surface to see what was really happening when my life, my quality of life just absolutely cratered. So it was a matter of life and death for me to start rooting around and doing some research and trying to find alternatives to the meme out there that, don't worry, sugar is just empty calories. You hear this all the time. And the problem is that the people who were responsible for this misdirection on sugar, for the creation of science research that supported the sugar industry, ultimately became the people at the top in the USDA. So they were the ones that then were setting out the standards for food safety.
Well, let's say
and requirements.
Let's say they made that transition, Paul. They went from doing this research to being in the government. Did they really believe their initial research? Did they take that set of beliefs with them in an honest way, even if the research itself was open to question?
I don't see how you. If Daddy Wawbucks walks up to you and says, "Hey, I'll pay you $1 million, if you emasculate, your best friend," and then I guess you could say, "Well, gee, I really believe that deep down underneath, my best friend was really a jerk, and so I rationalized that, I could." No, of course not. If they did, then they were morons.
I'm running that down, Paul. $1 million to emasculate your best friend sounds like a good premise for a horror film screenplay.
I don't know, but my you get my point. My point is I don't know how when the sugar industry walks up to you and pays you X amount of money to do an objective study with, as the papers that they discovered said, with the objective of, making sure that we look good, because that's what the papers say. All right, they were from a scientist who actually was alive back then and who, sort of journaled his experience at that time.
When you made your point about that, Paul, about the scientific research, you pointed at your multi-$1,000 MacBook Pro. Is it up and running now the way it should be?
Oh, it was all the time.
Okay.
There wasn't an issue, right? Well, the only issue was that even multi-$1,000 Apple MacBook Pros require a password.
One of the bad effects of sweeteners, and also artificial sweeteners, sugar substitutes, is that it can actually create an addiction, a physical addiction in your body for more sweeteners.
Yeah, we're going to get to that later in the show.
Right.
But, it was in the 1960s that scientists were paid, right, to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and promote saturated fat as the culprit instead. And that's what historical documents show, as I was saying, from this particular, now deceased scientist. And it really makes sense. The problem is that it's so disruptive and so confusing, to to us and to the everyday average individual when they don't have time to be doing the research and they're looking for some real guidance. And not to mention the fact that the government that is charged with the responsibility of guiding, supporting the health, our health, is just so completely under the thumb of industry. And that's why there really has to be this constant balancing, people out there challenging and, grassroots resistance to this mis and disinformation that is constantly being disseminated and passed off as good science. The bottom line is that sugar absolutely and totally and completely, without a doubt, undermines your health. No matter what you think, no matter what you believe, the laws of nature remain the laws of nature, right? It's like somebody who decides that gravity doesn't really apply to them. So they jump off the Memorial Bridge and wonder why now they're visiting the pearly gates. It doesn't matter. The laws of nature are the laws of nature. Concentrated sweeteners and the human bioorganism simply react in a way that undermines our quality of life. Now, because sugar does have the same kind of psychoactive response in the brain as cocaine, it is habit forming, and it does stimulate some of the pleasure areas of our body, and that's what makes it difficult, like any drug, to resist once you've started.
Well, to the point right there, sugar is popular because it tastes so good. Not just because it's everywhere, it is, but, it's pleasurable.
And just like any drug, it's pleasurable to a certain degree and always has the downside. There's always the cliff.
But I think sugar substitutes, tell me if I'm wrong, they exist, and they're not healthy either, but they exist because at some point there was awareness that sugar was bad from a dental point of view, if nothing else. So industry said, here are sugar substitutes. You can have these guilt-free, but as we found too, those are, in most cases, every bit as bad.
Yeah, and anybody who bought that, I would love to sell you that piece of the Astoria Bridge.
Well, many people
that I've
bought
been selling for as long as I've been here in Oregon.
Sugar substitutes would not be the massive industry
That's
they
a
are.
Joke, by the way.
I know, I understand
Thank
that.
you.
You did not get a rim shot.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, I mean I didn't expect a rim shot, but I wanted people out there to know I'm being facetious.
And that you're selling bridges?
Yes, and I'm selling the Astoria
Okay.
Bridge. But the bottom line is anybody who bought into that, right, bought into it because the industry and government was simply not there, as usual, to protect the public's health. And the other thing about the diet sweeteners was it's a beautiful business model, right? You develop something and you can patent it, which means it's yours, which means nobody else can have it, which means you can sell it for up to 17 years without any competition whatsoever, right? So now you basically own the pot of gold, and you can spend what you will, considerable millions of dollars, promoting it. And then, the other industry, the competing industries, can be belittled, and you can say, well, we know that sugar definitely is bad for your teeth, and so now we have a sweetener that not only is it simply empty calories and there's not much risk to it, but it doesn't harm your teeth.
And you speak of that 17-year expiration. That's usually when a patent expires. Is that right?
If I remember correctly.
Okay, I don't know if that's right. Here's big news, though, Paul, to go off on a brief tangent. The patent for Viagra expires in 2020.
What kind of non sequitur is this? This is a family show, for Pete's sakes. What is wrong with you?
Well, that might be dramatic news.
Please, no. Is that why your hair is standing on end?
I think some people are going to take that hard. The fact that Viagra will be, available as a generic drug beginning in 2020, so all these cheap knockoffs can.
So back to the mis and disinformation on sugar.
And by the way, that's accurate information about Viagra. No misinformation there whatsoever.
Oh, okay, great. Well, no misinformation on sugar here. You know, in 1700, the average person consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year.
That's a lot of sugar.
4 pounds a year.
That's a lot.
You think that's a lot?
Yes.
In 2009, more than 50% of all Americans consumed 1/2 pound of sugar per day.
Per day. So
translating to a whopping 180 pounds of sugar per year. The average American.
So we went from 4 pounds to 182 pounds, 180 roughly every year.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I don't even want to try to calculate what that is in terms of a percentage.
And obesity's gone up by, oh my gosh, I don't know how many 1,000%.
So let me ask you this, Paul, and I'm going to guess that I already know the answer, but that massive increase in the amount of sugar we're consuming, is that because sugar is now more present in more foods than it ever has been?
Yes. Yeah, it's present in, people don't really realize that a can of soda, for example, has about 8 teaspoons of sugar in it.
Right, so in 1900, when we were, as Americans, consuming on average 4 pounds of sugar a year, you couldn't necessarily go to your corner drugstore and get a nice big 16-ounce, soda pop.
No, there was no such thing. And so with the advent of fast food and the promotion of restaurants versus home cooking, and the like, then and of course, people like the sweet flavor, so usually ingredients, would contain some kind of sweetener, because the availability of the fresh foods was limited, and even more limited was ripe fresh foods. So, they needed to, come up with a way to titillate the taste buds, as it were, and so more sweeteners were added, and then the advent of if sugar is bad for you, then fructose, which is the sugar from fruit, is a better alternative, but it's expensive, so the industry created high fructose corn syrup, which was infinitely cheaper, right, and patentable at one point. And so, you just see how it, how the capitalistic drive just continues to warp reality.
Yeah,
with respect to health, warp reality with respect to health, and then people, like I say, people get busy. People don't have time to look below the surface, and then beliefs are ultimately adopted.
I think to be harder on ourselves as consumers, we should also understand that we just don't care to look sometimes. It's not a matter of not having time. It's just that we deny the reality of it.
Yeah, 32% of Americans are obese today, compared to 3.4% of white males in their 50s in 1890.
Wow, that's pretty rough.
Yeah. The soda industry has spent over $125 million to subvert regulation of or taxes on sugar, and continues.
And, of course, that's an ongoing battle, as you know.
We're going town by town now. Right?
Some localities will create their own taxes. They're taxing
sodas,
right? On sodas in particular, and especially they're going after the great big 64-ounce monsters that you can buy at convenience stores, for example.
Well, it turns out that the first and only tax, at least as of this writing, on soda was passed in Berkeley, California. Where else?
Yeah, that figures.
2014.
Do we know the extent of that tax? It's usually something like X% of the cost of that beverage. Something
whatever
like
it
that.
is. I mean, they've been taxing cigarettes and increasing it over time, until eventually it's a you pay a significant penalty to partake in an activity which is known with certainty to denigrate your health. Thus, because we are a society of many, that in turn affects the insurance rates of everybody else.
Yeah, it's a much larger issue. And as you may remember, Paul, a few years ago, Mayor Bloomberg, when he was in office in New York, tried to ban beverages
above a certain amount.
Right, and he was pretty much laughed off stage for that one. I think what that is an indicator of is that most of us accept the fact that we should take personal responsibility for those kinds of things. If they want to make these massive 64-ounce beverages available, which we know are bad for us, it's up to each of us as individuals to make that choice.
Yeah, I mean, I liken this in a way to seatbelts. I mean, there was a time in this country when seatbelts were basically, ignored. The usage of seatbelts was, below 50%.
Very true. If you're of a certain age, as we both are, you can remember those days.
And now it's, at least in Oregon, it's up to 98%.
I think it was only sometime in the 90s that Oregon created a seatbelt law, if I'm not mistaken.
So my point is it took many decades to change people's behavior. And I suggest that change took place one click at a time.
I don't know if outlawing sugar is the answer, though. I mean, we've created great restrictions on tobacco, and those restrictions are ongoing. That I can see. With sugar, to go back to my original point, I think it's a matter of each of us taking responsibility for ourselves.
It was the same thing with safety belts. I don't know where you got the idea was that we're outlawing sugar. That was not even the suggestion.
Well,
I say leave it there.
No. We
discussed, but it should be penalized.
We discussed a moment ago that in some localities they're trying to put taxes on it.
Yeah.
And maybe by saying outlawing, maybe I misspoke, but I'm just saying we're trying to restrict sugar. Let's put it that way, or make it, or to penalize us in some way as consumers for taking in this stuff.
Absolutely. Penalize. That's the only way people understand ultimately how to make a choice. If they want the choice, they're free to choose whatever they want.
And tobacco hasn't been outlawed either, but it's been restricted in many ways.
Exactly. It's not outlawed, but it's taxed to the hilt. It has consequences. If you're a smoker and you put that on your application for insurance, then your insurance is going to cost more than mine.
So with these two industries, let's take the sugar industry and the tobacco industry. What they have in common is they spent many millions of dollars over the course of decades to convince us that their products were safe. And of course, we all can go online and take a look at those old tobacco ads, say from the 40s, where you have a guy in a lab coat smoking a Camel and saying most doctors recommend Camels.
And doctors did recommend various brands of smoking
back in the day. But we now understand, I think it's a universal understanding now that tobacco's bad for you. I don't think we've come to that universal understanding yet as to the negative effects of sugar.
I think that is true from that standpoint, but I think it's coming upon us, which is why we're doing this show, because the additional increased risk to your health, to the quality of your life, is ginormous. And I say that as a clinician who is charged with the responsibility of helping people restore their health. And I have never been able to get a person off their medications or ever been able to restore their health if they continue to eat concentrated sweetener.
So we're talking about
not once, not ever.
A first step. Before anything else can happen in the way of improving your health, you have to do this.
That's a first step. That's a first step. And some people take that giant step and they just, make a left turn and they're there. And most other people are what I call toe tippers.
Toe tippers?
Yeah. When you walk into really cold water, they
toe dipper.
Toe tippers.
Toe dipper.
Yeah.
With a D.
If you like.
There you go.
You can also tip your toe into the water necessarily as well. Tip that foot.
Okay, I will accept that.
Thank you.
One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.